Hello, and welcome to the Sea People podcast. I'm Michelle, your host. This is a podcast about stories of the sea and the people who steward it. I'm joined by three lovely guests today. Very excited for them to share so many subjects across policy and conservation and community. So I will hand it off first to Anupa to introduce herself.
Hi, thanks for having me on. My name is Anupa Asokan. I'm the founder and executive director of an organization called Fish On. And essentially, we bring the fishing community into conversations about ocean conservation. So protecting our fisheries, protecting important habitats in the ocean, advocating for clean water, equitable access to the ocean so that everyone can enjoy a place that's healthy and thriving and full of fish. What else can I say? I have been fishing my whole life. That was my first connection to the ocean. It inspired me to study marine science and pursue a career in policy and advocacy, fighting for my favorite place. I've picked up other water activities along the way. I love to surf, I dive, scuba dive, have my dive master. What else? You name it, I've done it. I've paddled the entire Santa Monica Bay from Point Dume to Palos Verdes, which is the Los Angeles coastline where I live now. I'm all about the ocean over here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your intro, Anupa. And next up, Lorena.
Hey everybody, I'm Lorena. I was born in Texas and spent my childhood in Longview, shout out East Texas. And after living in a couple different places around the US and traveling, I have settled in Chile in South America, where I live in a small town called Limache, in the shadow of the mountain La Campana. And I am a journalist and a grant writer. I write grants for the Dene up in Arizona for ecological restoration of their lands. And what else? Before the pandemic, I used to work on a cruise ship where I had my longest stint at sea for 2 weeks without seeing or touching land. That really changes you. And I made a documentary with Valentina called Mishopshno about marine protected areas in a new marine protected area in California. Other things about me, I'm an earthy girl all the way. I am learning to be a little farmer, practicing with the earth. I made some flower seed bombs yesterday. I am now bilingual after having traveled around Latin America and living in Chile. And a fun fact is I rented a motorcycle in Vietnam and drove it for 2 months. I crossed the border to Laos, drove it around, crossed back into Vietnam, and only crashed and burned 3 times with no broken bones. So that's me.
Very adventurous, amazing. So many questions about that. My dad is from Laos, so I will have to ask you more about that. Any case, last but not least, Valentina.
Hi everybody, my name is Valentina. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, which, as everybody knows, is pretty landlocked when it comes to the ocean. So I really never learned how to swim as a kid. Actually, I almost drowned in the lake when I was a kid. So I had a pretty established fear of water for the majority of my life. And when I was in college, I got really into environmental studies and human rights studies, and I ended up studying anthropology, sociocultural anthropology, and went on to get a master's in international environmental law. So from there, I realized that I hate policy, as Anupa I'm sure can tell you, and I did not want to be a lawyer, so I went more into storytelling, which has been such a hobby of mine since I was a kid, and that kind of led Lorena and I to work together and create this independent documentary called Mishopshno, which for me it was the first documentary that I had ever worked on. So so that's a little bit about me. I guess I already shared my fun fact. The other fun fact I guess I could share that is ocean related is I did not learn how to swim until 2 years ago. And I was 30, oh God, how old am I? I was 31 at the time. So I'm kind of a late bloomer when it comes to water activities and water sports. But I had a really great teacher and I haven't drowned again, so yay.
Good. Keep surviving out there. I've also had my near-death experiences in varying bodies of water. Undeterred, though, because I love the water. Fellow scuba diver as well. Speaking of water, and I don't know if Valentina, that was your first memory of the ocean, but I'm going to throw it actually back to you to share your very first memory of, the ocean.
Yeah, so I had actually lived in California for a couple years out of my van and never stepped foot in the ocean out of fear. So then I was like, you know what, this is crazy. I'm in the most beautiful place in the world. Let me learn how to jump in the ocean. And as I was doing my swim lessons, my instructor brought me out on one of the worst days I could have possibly went out to swim. The waves were huge. I was terrified. And so I benched that experience as like an epic fail. That same year, I ended up going to Thailand and swimming and seeing coral reefs for the first time in my life. So that, I would say, was a little bit more impactful for me because I was actually able to see what was going on in the ocean without being plummeted by 6 foot, 7 foot waves, which is kind of insane because Californians are different. I would have never gone into the water if it wasn't for her. But seeing the coral for the first time and seeing sharks, my first shark ever, and jellyfish and all these crazy, beautiful, colorful species that are just surviving in the ocean, I got really, really into ocean conservation, even more so than I had before when I wasn't really working in ocean conservation. I was just an observer, a lover of the water. From afar, from a safe distance, but seeing what was actually happening in there, I was like, you know what, we have to do something about this to protect this. So that's also a lot of the inspiration behind why we were trying to figure out how to bring the ocean concept into one of our first documentary films. So that's my first memory. First 2 memories.
Love that. That's really redeeming to have barely survived and then go to see one of the most luscious coral reefs. Yeah, that's great. How about you, Lorena?
I grew up with a pretty big family. I have 13 cousins, and we used to take these trips down to Galveston, Texas, and rent a big house on a couple blocks away from the beach, all of us in a house, and we'd go to the beach together. So I remember being a little kid and getting so excited because you're about to spend a week with your cousins. We're just going to do nothing but play mermaids in the ocean all day. So I remember that. And the water in the Gulf, it was in Galveston, so the water is the Gulf water. It's almost tropical. It was nice and warm. And so it's been a shock for me to go to other oceans, and I'm like, it's actually cold here. That's not fun. So I always think fondly of those warm waters and the time with my cousins. And then as we've gotten older, it still remained pretty fun up until the 2010 BP oil spill. So, but one day we'll get back to it, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, time with family, those traditions and fond memories of warm waters. Love warm waters. It is very cold here in California, as Valentina has found out. Anupa, how about you?
Yeah, gosh, I guess I just have a sort of blur of memories from my childhood of being out on the water fishing with my dad. I grew up on the Gulf Coast of Florida, so other side of the Gulf from Lorena. And I used to fish the flats, so these really shallow there's lots of mangrove islands, seagrass beds, fish for red drum, speckled trout, mostly growing up. So most of my memories revolve around that. But to sort of flip your question on its head a little bit, I think something that was like very formative in my career was I actually used to teach marine science on Catalina Island, which is off the coast from Los Angeles. And we'd get students, it's a place called Catalina Island Marine Institute. We get students from across California as far as like Arizona, maybe some further inland states. They'd come for like a 3-day or a 5-day trip. And I'd get to take a group of kids snorkeling a couple times. We do night snorkels. We go hiking, kayaking around the island. And for a lot of kids, it's their first experience in the ocean. So being able to like give that to someone else, I think is always just a really special thing for me to like have that moment to like see your first Garibaldi, which is this bright orange fish that we have off the coast here. Yeah, like that just warms my heart to think about those times, right? And that's kind of the things that we're fighting to keep for future generations of kids.
Yes, inspiring the next generation. I wish I could go back in time and take that class with you or from you. That reminds me, I had a like middle school like formative experience with this program called Aim High that was targeted towards like more like socioeconomic need kids who got the opportunity to participate in musicals and go like tide pooling. It was like a summer camp. It was magical. Love. Great memories, great times. All right. Well, we're going to dive into the topics of today, which are very expansive. And I'll start with something that was mentioned earlier, which are marine protected areas. And I just love to throw it open to the entire group, whoever wants to tackle it first. What are they? Why are they important? Why are they contested? You know, what are the perceptions around them? Go ahead.
I'll take this in its most simple form, and then I'll pass it off to Anupa or Lorena. But I think, I thought I had a pretty good idea of what MPAs were until it was broken down into the simplest way to explain it, which are national parks under the water. So I think that's like a really good, comprehensive, like high-level explanation of what MPAs are, and that's a really good baseline of where to start. So that's kind of where we started for the film is, MPAs, national parks underwater, and as we all know with national parks, they're just as much need, if not more, protections in, the environmental law and policy scape. So Anupa, do you want to add your your scientific explanation to
Yeah,
this?
happy to. I guess that's why I'm here. So that's the easiest way to explain it, essentially. Yeah, national parks, state parks that we have underwater in the ocean. But it's also important to note that MPAs aren't unique to California. They're not unique to the United States. They're not like a new kind of policy tool. There have been cultures around the world that have used maybe not called a marine protected area, or MPA for short, but similar concepts of like area-based protections where we recognize that an area is important, whether it's for its habitat or maybe it's a spawning area or an important nursery area for a lot of the fish that we like to catch or things that we like to take from the ocean. So creating that space for nature to kind of like restore itself and seed the rest of the area is really important and has been recognized around the world for thousands of years, right? This is a tool that we've used. Another important thing that I'll add is that not all marine protected areas are created equally. So there's this concept called a level of protection. So based on what activities are allowed or not allowed within the space, you would expect some different kind of outcome. So for example, in the United States, our national park version of a marine protected area is something called a national marine sanctuary. And, it theoretically prohibits things like offshore oil and gas, dumping. There are some like water quality protections within them, but they can't actually, there's no authority within sanctuaries to regulate fishing. So for example, bottom trawling, which is objectively one of the most impactful forms of fishing, commercial fishing, where you're essentially bulldozing the seafloor to catch, whatever the thing might be. So California's halibut bottom trawl fishery, for example, about 9% of what they catch is halibut. So that gives you an idea of the impact. That means 91% of it is not halibut, right? These are happening. Bottom trawling is allowed in many of our national marine sanctuaries. So that would have a low level of protection as compared to, let's say in California, we have a state version called a state marine reserve, which limits all fishing in the area. And then there are other state level protections that would prohibit offshore oil and gas and mining sand or taking any of the geological kinds of resources within that area too. So those are what we'd call fully protected. And then there are marine protected areas that would be classified as highly protected. And so these are really interesting to me as someone that loves to fish and is very conscious about what I'm taking from the ocean. They might allow some level of like recreational fishing or lower impact commercial fishing, maybe, depending on what kinds of gear type, what kinds of net or tools you're using to take those resources from the ocean. So the, I guess, gold standard here is that highly or fully protected marine protected area, because you're really allowing the entire ecosystem to recover. And you have big fish. The bigger the fish, the more eggs they lay. I guess they don't lay eggs, release. And the hardier those eggs are going to be, right, when they do spawn. So there's a better chance of things surviving, particularly when we have things like climate change and our environment is changing so much. These are really important areas for marine life to be able to adapt to those changes and kind of, stack the deck in favor of ecosystems being able to adapt and thrive through climate change. That was a lot. Feel free to ask questions.
No, I think it's very informative for our listeners to learn more about these like levels, because just even as a concept, marine protected areas is quite complex, but then diving into the layers, like there's a gradient of protection levels, and with each gradient there are activities associated. So that's just like that level of detail, I think is good for the general audience to know, especially if like some of them partake in some of these activities and they wonder like, well, what can I really do in these areas? Like if I just want to go recreationally diving or snorkeling or fishing as just a non-business person or like, someone just walking up to a beach, how do I engage with these areas, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think there's this false dichotomy too, right, where a lot of people, or the dominant narrative in the fishing community, I think there are a lot of anglers and spearfishers that recognize the value and importance of having marine protected areas where you can't fish and ostensibly do the thing that you love to do in the ocean. And they're painted as like closures, right? It's to keep us out and it's to disconnect us from nature. But I think we have to remember as a fishing community the impact that we do have on the ocean. And, this gets into like the broader policy context and nuance. We can't just manage our oceans by the kinds of fish that we like to take, right? Like our whole system of ocean management is around like catch limits and size limits for, yellowtail, tuna, whatever the thing is that you like to catch in the ocean, and those prized or more highly valued species. But that system only accounts for like less than 1% of things that we know that live in the ocean. So 99% of what's out there has no real mechanism to be protected, to make sure, we're not monitoring it. We still haven't even discovered all of the species that are out there in the ocean. We discover new things on every like deep sea expedition. So this is a real opportunity to take that, make that investment in the ocean, right? And also be proactive about protecting things that have no mechanism to be protected otherwise.
Yeah, like you were mentioning the level of bycatch, the kind of just kind of more like maybe just targeted fishing techniques, because we have the sushi restaurants with their bluefin tuna and the halibut, like all these specialized fishes that we know off of the menu, but with each fish that we eat, there's how many numerous species that are unaccounted for, that were probably caught up in the nets and thrown away, unfortunately. Yes, Valentina.
No, I love to refer to this as like fad fishing. You know, we like to fish for the salmon and the trout and the more popular, the lobster. But in reality, and I don't, so don't quote me on this, but I know that there was an initiative in Northern California that, in Anupa, you probably know about this, where they kind of established the ground fish populations, and that was supposed to be more sustainable than any other type of fishing in California. So I always found that interesting. The other thing I also find interesting, as far as like why MPAs are contested, especially from a filmmaking perspective, and this is something that we had learned when we had been speaking with a lot of the fishermen, was that they view it as a closure, which is what Anupa had said, but they also see it as, well, where do we fish? Like, where are we supposed to go if this is in our backyard and this is a place that's no longer going to be accessible to us? So instead of seeing it as almost an opportunity to improve their fishing and improve their catch and their size of their catch, they're seeing it as, well, where do we go? Well, now we have to travel further to do the same activity we could have done in our backyard, which is surprisingly and funnily not the case for the MPA that we focused on in our film, because half the reef is still accessible. So that was another argument that I found really interesting, as far as MPAs go as well.
Yeah, I'd love to dive a little bit, or like dig into what this kind of, I guess, perception around ownership is. And I wonder, yeah, if any of you would like to tackle that, because the land and the seas, there are these blurry lines, right? Like, I mean, marine protected areas being one of those lines, but yet there are people, again, fishermen, indigenous people, who have been fishing and taking and in different scales and intensities over the years. But like, what is this, how does the feeling of like entitlement, ownership, and who gets to do what comes into play?
Oh man, that's a loaded question. And it's one I really, so as someone that fishes, but I also love to surf and dive and do other things in the ocean, right? Like, I'm perfectly happy swimming through, snorkeling, free diving through one of our state marine reserves and seeing huge fish there. Like, knowing that they're there and, thriving in the ocean, like, it makes me happy. And thinking about just like leaving everything open to do whatever you want to do, like, it's really important to have that baseline for people to understand what the ocean could look like. And so when we're doing our fishery management and regulations, like all of that wonky policy, right, you need to know what the ocean could be. Like, what is normal? What should be striving for? Like, what is our vision for the future? And I mean, I don't know, there's a lot that I can say. I think science is really important and should be the baseline for how we make all of these decisions, but it's ultimately like people's values that frame whatever decision is made. And so when you have folks that believe like they have more of a connection or should have more of a say as to what happens in the ocean because they take from it, that has never sat well with me as someone that fishes. Right? Like, there are so many other ways to enjoy the ocean, and there's plenty of data on like how people choose to visit the coast in California and what they like to do. And the overwhelming majority of folks are going to the ocean to like be in nature, you know, have leisure time with their families, you know, whale watch, wildlife viewing, those kinds of things. And to sort of prioritize one group because of what they do, I don't know. I've always struggled with that kind of value system. And that's one of the big reasons why I started an organization like Fish On, is to find other folks like me that just have a different value and sort of ethos around like what our relationship or what our responsibility to the ocean should really be. I don't know that I answered your question, but sort of.
I think that was a great answer. And you know, I love that you brought up the fact that you don't actually have to be in the water in order to enjoy the ocean. Like I said, I lived on the California coastline for 5 years without going in the ocean, but I was there every single day. And I think, you know, historically, a lot of communities have been marginalized from the coast, and we are regaining access to the coast. And I don't think, based on the activities that happen in the water, mean that you shouldn't have a say in what's happening in it. And it's sometimes hard to kind of envision what's happening in it because, you know, I didn't see the coral, I didn't see the dead coral, I didn't see the lack of biodiversity before I learned to swim and before I went in there. So I think just like discounting a whole group of people because they're not anglers, they're not commercial fishermen, they're not divers, I think is just really, I think it's really unfortunate and really unfair, to be honest.
Yeah, if I can just add an analogy, I used to hear a lot in a previous role and campaign I worked on, right? This comparison, like appealing to surfers and other folks that use the ocean, like how would you feel if your like whatever popular surf break was closed to you and you couldn't do that thing anymore? I don't know, let's say Trestles, which is a famous surf break in Southern California. But I think that misses the point, right? Like you can catch a wave and the next wave and every wave that comes, you might annoy the people around you, right? But the next wave is still going to be there, right? Like what you do in that moment has no impact on what comes next. Fishing is a very different story, right? If you take too much, there's not going to be any more left for the next person or the next generation and the generations after that. So what we do as anglers, as spearfishers, is a very real impact on the future of the ability to do that thing into the future. So I think if you flip that question a little bit, right? Like let's say we close Trestles, but by closing Trestles, it would ensure that all of the neighboring surf breaks would continue to break and have great waves, and through climate change and sea level rise, it would preserve those surf breaks for the future, right? Then that becomes a very different question, and we get into this like value system. Is it what I need right now in this moment in my lifetime, or am I willing to invest in the future of this thing long term?
That's a great analogy. And you just think about, fish and the critters they're a finite resource. There's a reason why there's hydropower because the waves, as long as the moon keeps working as it does, the waves will be there. I want to throw it to Lorena. I know if you have any thoughts around the perceptions, the people, in your experience, you doing grant writing and everything around taking a position, making a case for these areas.
Yeah, I think coming back to the idea of ownership, like what does it mean to own a place? Or like the land and the sea are not necessarily resources for us to own. Like we've, under like Western capitalism, we've turned it into that. But I think about how the pueblos and the native peoples, they don't have a concept of ownership like that, and they didn't. And it was more, instead of like my right to access this water, which is kind of the philosophy of what I'm seeing behind a lot of the fishermen, it's more of like, what is our collective responsibility to care for the ocean, to steward? What does it look like to take but also give back? And so, I don't know, just even in our interviews, I've noticed that difference in speaking with either the people from the Chumash Pueblo, who would be the co-managers of this state marine protected area that our documentary talks about, Mishopshno, and the fishermen. And I think too, I know Valentina said, marginalized people have been, certain groups of people of color have been marginalized from access to the coast. And we even have to think about, well, how did that happen? And there's things like you've got to get a fishing license. Can you pay for a boat to take you out? Do you own a boat? Can you rent a boat? Do you have the time? Do you live close enough to the coast? Even like, what are the beaches that are privatized versus public? When we were filming, we had a day where we wanted a different angle of the beach outside of the Carpinteria public beach. It's a pretty big public beach, but we wanted a slightly different angle. And we were driving, trying to find access, but so much of the beach has been privatized. And so even thinking like, all of these different ways, having to have money to access the water, or having to either live in a neighborhood or find the time or drive the distance to a public beach, all these things are limits to access. So in terms of Mishopshno becoming what potentially a state marine protected area, it would be exciting because it maintains this Carpinteria coast as it's still public access. People can still fish from shore. They can still rent a kayak and enter and swim out or paddle out and go see the reefs, and the fishermen can still come around the edge and still fish on a partial section of the reef that will be outside the marine protected area. And I don't know, it feels like a win-win for everyone. Kind of like this, it's an ability to really turn this section of coastline and rocky reef into this opportunity for collective stewardship, and how can we give back. And I know that's something that the Chumash Nation is working on right now. Like, what would that look like? We spoke with this one woman, Eva, and she has a nonprofit called Ocean Origins, where she's getting science dive certifications for different Chumash people, so they can also go down to the dive, study what are the species down there, what's abundant, what's missing, what's invasive, what are the solutions, what are ancestral solutions to caring for the ocean, and and making sure that everything is looking good and healthy down there, so that we can keep continuing to dive, snorkel, paddle, swim in these beautiful marine landscapes.
I love how you brought up like ancestral solutions. I had a fellow design peer talk about, instead of AI being artificial intelligence, it's ancestral intelligence, which is just so powerful as a phrase. You think like all these practices that have worked in the past that have been either forgotten intentionally and or pushed aside for capital gains, as they say, and really it's something we as a collective can revisit and learn from, in terms of sustainability and being a more regenerative instead of an exploitative society. So since we have already started touching upon many aspects of the film, I'd love to pivot into that area, which is, how did the concept of the film start, in terms of like inspiration? And Lorena, you just talked about the people that you interviewed. I'd love to hear more about any kind of aha moments or any surprising anecdotes that came up in terms of interviewing and finding more about the people and the organizations that are impacted by this new MPA.
Yeah, so Valentina and we've worked together as storytellers over the past couple years, and we met Anupa at this environmental storytelling festival. We spoke with her, and she told us about her work and about this marine protected area that was popping up along the coast, the proposal, and we thought it seemed really interesting, and so we decided, hey, let's go do a story on it. So we just dove right in, really, and started doing interviews with different organizations, different people, different stakeholders, and began uncovering this concept, marine protected areas, which sounds like as simple as Valentina's said, like it could be like a national park, but it's marine. How contested it was. It was just interesting to go down and see the really wide range of perspectives, which to me and Valentina, we thought like, oh, this sounds like a great idea, no-brainer. And to really see how the opposition came up, and how people opposed the marine protected area. I don't know, just what their logic was behind it. I think we heard someone say, like, oh, Native people, they can stay on their res, but they can't come and take away my fishing. And so I think that revealed a lot to us about how the opposition looked at this marine protected area.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite quotes from, well, it's kind of an off quote. One of the people we had interviewed didn't say this directly, but the sentiment was the same. It was, what about me? And Lorena and I have not stopped quoting that since we had talked to this fisherman, because it just goes to show that, humans will always put themselves at the center of everything that happens with the environment. And unfortunately, or fortunately, if there were no humans, the environment would bounce back, hopefully. I mean, it will take however many thousands of years, but we just love putting ourselves at the center of everything. So when we had heard one of the fishermen say, what about me? What about my access? What about, Caucasians, which was actually a word that was used in our interview. It just goes to show, like, the ego is at the center, and we need to remove our ego and, this egocentrism and from the whole equation in order to actually push environmental anything forward. So whether it's ocean conservation, whether it's land conservation, whether it's wildlife conservation, we actually have to step outside of it and focus on, like, the problem at hand. Like, we're trying to save the planet for people, not for the planet. And I think that that's kind of a twisted way to look at it. And I think that's how a lot of people that we interviewed on the opposing side almost look at it. Is it's for us, right? And so when you step outside of that, I think it's, you kind of start to support the MPAs and the conservation initiatives more than when you put yourself at the center of it.
Yeah, the stepping back and seeing us as the same species, as humans, as people, is is always one of those things where, like, oh yeah, we all need to eat, we all need to try to figure out how to survive and hopefully thrive, and why kind of position ourselves, like, as adversaries? It's very interesting as, like, a society and culturally, especially in the West.
Valentina mentioned, it's nature will be fine on its own. I love to say, like, the ocean will be fine without us. Like, waves are still going to happen. Like, the fish will do their thing. Everything will be fine. So when we talk about these policy initiatives, right, it's about managing our relationship with the ocean or nature, the world, so that we can continue to exist and sustain ourselves long term, right? Like, that is the underlying thing. I think we started to get at this idea of environmental justice, right? There have been certain groups, certain communities that have benefited from nature, the ocean in this case, to the burden of other communities, right? Like, what was once accessible, fisheries, healthy habitats, unpolluted waters, what was once accessible from shore for a lot of people is no longer. There are certain fisheries that just, you can't cast out and catch that species from shore anymore. And what's left is often polluted. In the Los Angeles area, we have to contend with DDT contamination. A lot of what, like, subsistence, low income folks are now able to get to, right, have DDT contamination. And so they're literally poisoning themselves to try and feed themselves and their family. So when we talk about environmental justice, when we're trying to, like, kind of right and, like, level set that past wrong, I think one group will feel this sort of, like, perceived burden in the short term. But then again, if we're looking long term, everyone is going to benefit from those environmental justice actions. And I think that is also what's missing. And maybe it goes back to what I said before about short-term versus long-term gain. Anyway.
Yeah, I think about, like, the developed countries being the biggest polluters, and then, the global south taking the hit, and that's very much has been the trend, and if we were just to, do things like consume less, animal products, all these many things like as corporations and individual consumer actions can do. Maybe people wouldn't in the global south wouldn't be taking all of our plastic, or not taking, but like ending up with most of our plastic and our textile refuse, and also the fishing population being depleted also there. So in any case, that's a whole other kind of rant. How about positive success stories around where has regulation and designations worked, and we've seen the fruits of the labor after years of policy, years of convincing, years of smart storytelling, get to a place where things are going well, and it has been a proven technique and technology and policy.
I guess I can take that one. Well, and maybe we neglected to ground the subject of the film, which is the Mishopshno, the proposed Mishopshno State Marine Conservation Area in California, within a network of 124 existing marine protected areas along the California coast. So that has been established for about, give or take, 10 years. And we're in this process, I guess it's been more than that now because we've been in this new process for a while. But within the law that established those original marine protected areas is this idea called adaptive management. So as we continue to research and monitor these areas in the ocean, as climate changes, as our relationship and our values and what we want from the ocean change over time, there is the flexibility to adapt that marine protected area network to better serve all of us. So in that adaptive management process, many tribes have submitted proposals for potential new, tribally co-managed areas. There are fishing industry groups that have proposed to open areas to certain kinds of fishing. There is any number of different actions kind of proposed. So this is one of them, is to create this new marine protected area within the network of 124. That said, a lot of the protected areas that we've had have been extremely successful, right? Like I mentioned Point Dume here in Los Angeles. It's one of my favorite places to go in the ocean, although because of sea level rise, the access point down has recently been closed, which is wild that our biggest urban area, it's really hard to get to any of our state parks underwater. Let's see, off the Channel Islands, there was a study several years ago now that the lobster fishery has been boosted by 225% or something like that since those MPAs have been established. The critically endangered giant black sea bass is seen most often, right? The population has recovered faster off those Channel Islands, those really large marine protected areas. So over time, I think we've learned what factors go into a marine protected area. What's the size? Is it enforced? What are the different kinds of rules and levels of protection within them that are the most effective? So we know more about what makes an MPA work. And then we also have different kinds of MPAs that are, we'll say, re-emerging. Hawaii has these really amazing, they're called community-based subsistence fishing areas. Similarly, I think there's one particular one that's been around for about 10 years that's showing real promise and real success. And that's native Hawaiian run and managed, co-managed area that is meant for subsistence harvest for the local community. And California is in the process of establishing something called an indigenous marine stewardship area. So there's one that's been proposed off the northern coast of California. What that looks like and what co-management looks like is still a question mark. And then I mentioned there's the Rahui, and there's all these in Polynesian culture, different kinds of marine protected areas, different cultures around the world have similar concepts that have been around forever and shown success. So
that's very promising and encouraging to hear, especially in the kind of environmental apocalypse kind of narrative that's been pervasive. So yeah, and Lorena, you had mentioned in our kind of earlier chat, there's a Chilean case study. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, down here in Chile, there's an archipelago called the Juan Fernandez Islands, which are, let me look at the number, they are 415 miles west of the coast, so pretty far off, but it's still technically Chile. And there's less than 1,000 people that live there, that their economy is mainly tourism and fishing. And the artisanal fishermen there, those are people that are basically fishing to feed their family and their community. They noticed larger, like, commercial fishing trawlers coming by. They noticed, like, migratory birds, whales, other migratory species, their patterns shifting. They noticed less fish, and they were worried because they were thinking, well, how are we going to, continue sustaining our community? And so they actually proposed expansions of an existing MPA around their island. There's a section that is open, but it is the national parks around the island. They expanded the MPA by 130,000 square miles, so which is huge. It's most of Chile, and it's like, I think it's over half of the ocean in Chile, or like off the coast of Chile. And so that was really interesting because in April I went to the Ocean Day in California, Sacramento, and someone from Azul, another really cool ocean environmental justice nonprofit, she actually brought in some of the fishermen from the Juan Fernandez Islands so that they could speak about their experiences to us. And it was really refreshing to see how it doesn't have to be fishermen versus conservationists. They can be one and the same, because we saw this whole group of fishermen who are very, really passionate about protecting the waters in order to maintain, and they kept referring to, we want to keep fishing what our grandparents fished. They still use a lot of, their fishing gear is very ancestral. It's what their grandparents used. They're not looking for the newest, quickest, most efficient thing. And so I think that was really interesting, their pride in maintaining that tradition, because of, more than anything, because that's what allows these fish populations to rebound every year so that they can continue fishing in a really sustainable manner. So I found that to be really inspiring after, working on this documentary and seeing a very polarized reception to the MPA. And so just seeing that it's it doesn't have to be that way. And then Anupa named all of these other really awesome examples that are happening worldwide. So yeah, MPAs are working. They have worked and they are continuing to work.
Yes, it's great to hear these success stories, just to show that they're, a proven way to get everyone to collaborate and see the place as a commons, right? So that we can ensure healthy catch for everyone in the future. And I really love hearing how there's tools that are still being used from their grandparents' generation. I think it really points to that analog and or nostalgia trend that either has been, I don't know if it's overtaking places other than the Bay Area, but there's a little bit of a wanting to return to a previous time. And then separately, I'd love to ask a bit more about something that underlies it all, which is funding and funding sources and funding structures. And it is something that always either but makes or breaks any sort of initiative, and especially from storytelling and filmmaking, or any kind of organization, whether it's nonprofit, for-profit. Love to hear just a little bit about how either the trials or challenges of funding or successes of funding has influenced this process.
Yeah, I can start with that just from a bigger picture ocean conservation perspective. I think it goes back to, maybe this has been my theme for everything that I've said, but like what we value, and that's kind of where philanthropy tends to go. I operate as a nonprofit organization, right? So we rely on grants from philanthropy, family foundations, grassroots donations from our community of anglers, spearfishers. But like big picture, like we think about the ocean is our planet. It's like more than 70% of our planet. Less than 1% of philanthropy goes to the ocean and ocean causes, which is wild. Like literally the thing that sustains us on this planet. It drives our weather, it gives us oxygen, like literally sustains us and gives us food. It doesn't get a lot of dollars and attention. So many of us working in this space have had to be like scrappy, shoestring, like even ocean monitoring technology, you get really clever with how to repair things, duct tape and zip ties, that sort of vibe. So yeah, I don't know, I guess this is my call to folks, right? Like if you care about the ocean, find an organization aligned with your values, doing good work, and help them out, even if it's just a little bit.
Yeah, and I'll say, like, it could be something as simple as just like reposting. I know Fish On does this wonderful podcast where if you're not really clued into what's happening across the California ocean space, listen to their podcast, repost their podcast so it gets more reach so other people can see it. And then hopefully it lands in the right hands of people who, feel like they want to contribute and that is something that they value. So they can push the message forward, because also with storytelling, I mean, none of this would happen. Podcasts, films, written works, nothing will happen without with storytelling. I mean, most people don't have access, like we had said before, to what's actually happening in the environment. This is why stories are so powerful. It is a way to get people in touch with what is actually happening on the ground, in the water, in these communities that you might never go to. So if, it might not always be a financial commitment, but even sharing, posting, signing the petition, showing up to Fish and Game commission meetings to voice your concern or even support the people who are doing the legwork on the ground. Those are all impactful initiatives. And funding is nice. I mean, Lorena and I shot our film living in a van for 2 weeks, scrapping it, eating out of cans, and we did it. I mean, there's never a lot of funding in environmental conservation or environmental storytelling, but if there's a will, there's a way, and we were lucky to have so much support from friends, family, other nonprofits like Fish On. We've had great support in a way that we were able to make this film. But yeah, just helping independent filmmakers and nonprofits and everyone just like work together for this shared mission would be really impactful and really great.
Yeah, I realized I failed to mention how we all met, which is really what it kind of spurred this question too, because I had attended a screening of Mishopshno, and at the end there was question and answers open to the audience, and I was asking about how to kind of scale impact, whether in like a financial, monetary way, and I was like, why don't we ask corporations have some sort of incentive program for employees of these tech companies to go out and do whatever it can be, whether it is like taking purple sea urchins out to replenish the kelp forest, or take out any sort of invasive species, do beach cleanups, like whatever, matching programs, all these things that are processes and or programs that make it more accessible, I think, for people to take action. And I love, Valentina, how you mentioned social media. What a powerful tool to with its dark side as well, but it has its platform. If used well, its tools are wielded in the way with intention. good or bad. So used well can elevate and broadcast to a wider audience, to people who may not have heard about kelp forests or coral reefs. And that all comes down to storytelling. So I really appreciate that. I also want to go into funding shifts, because we did talk about in our kickoff meeting about how funding has shifted from certain initiatives to different initiatives. And I know, Anupa, we were talking about that. If you can expand on that a little more.
I guess in the ocean conservation space, it's been interesting how much attention has gone into, I don't know, like big fancy tools that float out in the ocean to catch plastic, or I don't know, like a new technology that's going to solve some big problem, but we don't look at the source of those issues. I mean, it's often the plastic industry itself that's donating money into these things that claim to solve the problem, right? Clean up the ocean or whatever it is. And I think it gives us this false sense of like we're fixing it when the tap is still running, right? Like there's so much more plastic being produced. There is like investment being made in, new facilities to produce more plastic, right? So we need to look at like what is actually causing these problems and how are we finding effective ways to mitigate and deal with that and protect the thing that truly sustains us, which is this planet. So yeah, maybe that's my call to folks to like not forget about like the policy tools, right? That's ultimately going to be the most impactful way to really make a dent in some of these huge problems that we're facing on our planet. So like invest in the people that like spend their day all day, all night, just like really thinking about these existential issues and the ways that, I guess it's going to impact people on the ground and the communities that are facing these challenges, and like empower them to be able to like bring their solutions forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great call to action, because like the sense of agency that people may or may not have these days, it's like, well, what can I do, as an individual or as a person working for a corporation or a nonprofit or what have you. And maybe it is just like inviting yourself into rooms that you might not have thought you were, privy to, like attending a Fish and Game, like commission meeting, which may or may not be in your local area.
It could also just be as simple as, and somebody had given me this advice a long time ago. They said, pick a cause, right? Pick a cause, learn about it, educate yourself on it, and then commit to it. So go all in. And if everyone kind of did that, we would see so much change happening. I think we're in the habit of kind of spreading ourselves thin, especially across the environmental protection space, that we're all a little burnt out, to be honest. And I think, for people who do want to have an impact, pick one thing to be passionate about and commit to it.
Yeah, sometimes focus is key, because then you can sustain it better instead of, like you said, spreading yourself out across too many subject areas, which I find myself sometimes the victim of. Being like, I want to do it all, but also I do not have the time nor energy to do it all. So focus. Speaking of focus, as we wrap up our conversation, which has been so informative, so enlightening, and very inspiring, just from like each of your respective angles, there's just so much impact to be made, from storytelling to getting funding to creating and remaking policy. I think there's a lot for listeners and viewers to mull on and choose their own adventure, whatever path they choose to take. So the closing question that I ask all of my guests is, with everything that you know now, and it may or may not relate to whatever you're working on now, it could be anything, what is one thing you would tell your younger self and the audience?
Care about something bigger than yourself.
Great one. That is pithy and simple, and people can definitely digest that one. I'll throw it over to Lorena.
I think I'd say, like, look to the past for more answers. Like, study history, study what people have been doing, because I think a lot of really good solutions to environmental disaster and environmental justice are already here, and they've been practiced at some point in time already. So, study history, see what it has for us.
Yes, history has many lessons to teach us if we dare or are curious enough to look back. All right, Valentina.
Lorena, I love that answer. Mine, oh gosh, this is a hard question. What would I tell my younger self? Probably don't go to law school. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Oh, I got a good one. All power to the people, collective liberation. We could definitely all do this together if we just band together.
Love that. Yes, mass activation, because beyond parties, beyond corporations, we are people at the end of the day, and with enough shared values, as has been the running theme, there's so many things that could be accomplished. I mean, revolutions have happened in the past, and that's how we've gotten so many of the rights that we have now, right? Well, this has been excellent. The very, very last thing, I promise, is any plugs you might have. I mean, each of you have worked and have been working in your respective organizations. We talked about Petition, the film Mishopshno, and love to hear any more events. It could be film screenings or adjacent nonprofits, NGOs doing the great work that you would like to promote.
I guess I'll start with that one. If any of this resonates with you, please check out Fish On. We're at fishon.us on the interwebs. Fish On Conservation on socials, and then our podcast where we dive into some of these wonky policy issues and also just have fun conversations about fishing. Fish On Air. It's on most of the podcast platforms. You can find us there. And then if you want to, I'll let Valentina and Lorena talk about the film, but there is an opportunity to support some of these proposals to strengthen California's Marine Protected Area Network. And mid-October are those dates. And if you follow Fish On Instagram, we'll be sharing opportunities and help you with talking points or whatever. But if you can turn up and speak up for the ocean, then that'd be really helpful.
On our end, go to mishopshnofilm.com to check out our trailer, which is pretty spicy, and some background information about the Marine Protected Area. We're open to doing screenings with schools, organizations, your mutual aid squad. Just feel free to reach out. We have our email linked on there, and we also have an option where you can write a letter to the Fish and Game Commission to say that we would love to see Mishopshno's establishment, which they will be voting on in October. So that link to write that letter is also on our website. So please go check that out, because more voices. We go to these meetings and we see lots of voices speaking in opposition and not enough voices speaking in approval and wanting this marine protected area. So send a letter or feel free to write one.
And Valentina, any plugs from you?
I think I would just second both Fish On and Mishopshno.com, Mishopshnofilm.com, and just help us get these MPAs passed.
Yes, with every signature, every share, there's impact to be made.
One last thing, Anupa mentioned this, but the decision for Mishopshno will be made in October. So the sooner you sign, the more support that we can garner for the passage of Mishopshno.
Awesome. So there is a time constraint to this. So yes, listeners, viewers, check out everything. This will all be linked in the show notes. So there will be resources for you to look to and refer to. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Lorena, Anupa, Valentina, for such a stimulating conversation about MPAs and filmmaking, storytelling, policy, and people. I'd hope to have you all on potentially in a future episode to see how things go. And again, together, let's see people as see people. Thank you again. See People is a production by Seafoam Studio. I'm Michelle, your host. This is a space to be expansive and explore the underwater world of stories of the sea and the people who steward it. See People is available on wherever you find your podcasts. If you would like to leave a rating and review, please do. There will be a form in the show notes to give feedback, because feedback is a gift. Episodes will be released bi-weekly, so stay tuned for the next one. Thank you for listening.